June 13th, 1944. Normandy, France. 7 days after D-Day. Lieutenant Colonel Robert G. Cole of the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, stands at the edge of a hedgerow, staring across 150 meters of open ground at an unremarkable ridge. The ridge has no name on any map, no strategic value that anyone in command can articulate. It's just another low rise in the endless Norman bocage, the maze of small fields divided by centuries-old hedgerows that has turned the liberation of France into a nightmare of close-quarters combat. Cole's battalion has been ordered to take this ridge. The order came down from regiment with no explanation, no intelligence about enemy strength, no clear reason why this particular piece of worthless ground matters. But orders are orders. Cole studies the ridge through his binoculars. He can see German positions, machine gun nests in the hedgerows, foxholes along the crest, at least one anti-tank gun. His intelligence officer estimates maybe a company of Germans defending, perhaps 120 men. It looks like a straightforward assault. Take casualties crossing the open ground, close with the enemy, clear the position, consolidate. A few hours' work. What Cole doesn't know, what nobody knows yet, is that this unnamed ridge sits at the precise intersection of 3 German defensive lines. What looks like a company is actually the forward element of an entire regiment. And over the next 48 hours, this forgotten piece of Norman farmland will consume over 1,000 lives and become one of the bloodiest small unit actions of the entire Normandy campaign. Today, we reveal the true story of Dead Man's Ridge, the 48 hours of savage fighting that transformed an anonymous hilltop into a graveyard and exposed the brutal reality of bocage warfare. The story begins not on June 13th, but a week earlier on D-Day itself. The 101st Airborne Division parachuted into Normandy in the early morning hours of June 6th, with the mission of securing causeways and bridges behind Utah Beach. The drop was chaotic. Paratroopers scattered across the Norman countryside, units mixed together, equipment lost. But through individual initiative and small unit leadership, the 101st accomplished its D-Day objectives. By June 7th, they're consolidating positions and preparing for the next phase, breakout from the beachhead. The strategic situation in mid-June 1944 is frustrating for Allied commanders. The landing succeeded, but progress inland is agonizingly slow. The Norman bocage, small fields surrounded by thick hedgerows built up over centuries, creates perfect defensive terrain. Every field is a potential kill zone. Every hedgerow conceals German positions. Tanks can't maneuver. Artillery can't see targets. Infantry has to fight field by field, hedgerow by hedgerow, in brutal close-quarters combat that favors defenders. The German defense is anchored on the city of Carentan, a critical road junction that connects Utah Beach and Omaha Beach. If the Germans hold Carentan, they keep the American beachheads separated. If the Americans take Carentan, they can consolidate and push inland. The 101st Airborne, along with elements of the 29th Infantry Division, is tasked with capturing Carentan. The city falls on June 12th, after 3 days of vicious street fighting. But German forces retreat in good order, establishing new defensive lines in the countryside south of the city. This is where the unnamed ridge enters the story. American intelligence, based on aerial reconnaissance and prisoner interrogation, believes the Germans have pulled back several kilometers to reorganize. The plan is for American forces to pursue aggressively, keeping pressure on retreating Germans and preventing them from establishing strong defensive positions. The 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment receives orders to advance south from Carentan, cross the Dove River, and secure high ground, vaguely defined as dominant terrain features south of the river. Lieutenant Colonel Cole's 3rd Battalion draws the assignment to lead the advance. On the morning of June 13th, they cross the Dove on a partially destroyed bridge and begin moving south through the bocage.
Progress is slow, maybe 500 meters per hour. Every hedgerow requires careful clearing. Every field could contain an ambush. The paratroopers are exhausted. They've been in continuous combat or high alert for 7 days since the D-Day jump. They're short on sleep, low on supplies, and suffering casualties from German snipers and mortar fire. Around 1 p.m. on June 13th, Cole's battalion emerges from hedgerow and sees the ridge. It's about 800 meters ahead, running roughly east-west, maybe 15 meters higher than the surrounding terrain. Not particularly impressive as military terrain goes, but it's the highest ground in the immediate area, which technically makes it dominant terrain. Cole's orders are to secure dominant terrain. Therefore, by military logic, he needs to take the ridge. What Cole can see through his binoculars is concerning. German positions are visible along the ridge crest, at least 3 machine gun nests, multiple foxholes, and what looks like a 75mm anti-tank gun positioned to cover the approach. The ground between Cole's position and the ridge is completely open. 3 large fields with scattered apple trees, but no significant cover. Any assault will be exposed to German fire for at least 5 minutes while crossing that distance. Cole requests artillery support. Regiment promises him a preparatory barrage, but warns that ammunition is limited. The artillery units are still getting established and resupplying after the D-Day chaos. Cole will get 15 minutes of artillery fire on the ridge. Then his battalion is on its own. He accepts these terms. There's no alternative. The attack is scheduled for 3 p.m. At 2:45 p.m., American artillery begins pounding the ridge. 105mm shells impact along the crest, throwing up fountains of dirt and smoke. For 15 minutes, the ridge is obscured by explosions. Cole and his men watch from the hedgerow, hoping the Germans are being killed or at least suppressed. At 3 p.m. exactly, the artillery lifts. Cole's first assault wave, about 150 paratroopers from I Company, rises from cover and begins advancing across the open ground. For the first minute, it seems like the artillery worked. There's no German fire. The paratroopers move forward in extended lines, weapons ready, waiting for shooting to start. They cover maybe 75 meters. Then the ridge erupts. German machine guns open fire simultaneously from at least 6 positions. The distinctive sound of MG-42s, called Hitler's buzzsaw by American soldiers because of their incredibly high rate of fire, rips across the fields. Tracer rounds arc toward the advancing Americans. Men start falling. The paratroopers hit the ground, trying to find cover that doesn't exist. They're in the middle of open fields with nowhere to hide. Some crawl toward apple trees, others lie flat in shallow ditches. The German machine guns keep firing, systematically working over the prone Americans. Cole realizes immediately that his intelligence was catastrophically wrong. This isn't a company-strength position. The volume of fire suggests at least a battalion, possibly more. And the Germans weren't suppressed by artillery. They were in deep bunkers or withdrew temporarily, then returned to positions when the shelling stopped. His assault has walked into a carefully prepared kill zone. The first assault wave is pinned down approximately 100 meters from the ridge. They can't advance. Moving means instant death. They can't retreat. Standing up to run back means instant death. They can lie there and hope for darkness, but German mortars are already beginning to drop rounds among them. Cole makes a brutal calculation. His men will die if they stay pinned in the open. They might survive if they charge and close with the German positions. Close combat favors the Americans because German machine guns lose effectiveness at point-blank range.
Cole does something that will earn him the Medal of Honor. He stands up in full view of German guns, waves his pistol, and starts running toward the ridge while screaming for his men to follow. This is insane by any tactical standard. Officers don't lead charges anymore. This isn't 1914. But Cole understands that his men won't move unless someone shows them it's possible. By making himself the most obvious target, he draws German fire toward himself and away from his soldiers. Approximately 70 paratroopers rise and follow Cole in what becomes known as Cole's Charge, a bayonet assault across open ground against entrenched positions. It's archaic, desperate, and somehow it works. The Germans are surprised by the audacity. Their machine gunners momentarily hesitate, confused by Americans charging directly into their fire. That hesitation, maybe 5 seconds, allows Cole's men to cover 30 meters. Then German fire resumes, but the Americans are moving fast now, running and screaming, adrenaline overriding fear. Paratroopers reach the base of the ridge and start climbing. Close quarters combat erupts. Grenades, bayonets, rifle butts, knives. The fighting is savage and personal. Americans clear German foxholes one by one. Machine gun positions are assaulted with grenades and phosphorus smoke. The 75mm gun crew is killed before they can reload. Within 20 minutes of Cole reaching the ridge, the crest is in American hands, but the cost is terrible. Approximately 30 paratroopers dead or dying, another 40 wounded. I Company has lost nearly half its strength, taking a ridge that wasn't even on the map. Cole establishes a defensive perimeter on the ridge crest, fully expecting German counterattack. What he doesn't know yet is that his battalion has just kicked over a hornet's nest. The ridge his men captured isn't an isolated outpost, it's the forward position of a major German defensive line. Behind the ridge, perhaps 500 meters south, are at least 2 more German battalions preparing defensive positions. Cole's attack has disrupted German plans to establish a strong defensive line south of Carentan. German commanders can't allow Americans to hold the ridge because it provides observation over their positions. The German counterattack begins at 4:30 p.m., 90 minutes after Cole's charge. It's not a probing attack, it's a full-scale assault by elements of the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, elite German paratroopers who are some of the best infantry in the Wehrmacht. Approximately 400 German soldiers attack the ridge from the south, advancing in organized waves with machine gun support and mortar fire. Cole's depleted battalion, now down to maybe 250 effective soldiers after I Company's losses, faces a force twice their size. The fighting is desperate. Germans reach the ridge crest and hand-to-hand combat erupts. Paratroopers from both nations, American and German airborne, theoretically elite troops with mutual professional respect, kill each other with knives, entrenching tools, and bare hands when ammunition runs out. The battle for the ridge crest continues until darkness. Cole calls for artillery support, but is told ammunition is critically short. He can get a few fire missions, but not sustained support. He requests reinforcement, but regiment has no reserves available. Every unit in the area is engaged. Cole's battalion has to hold with what they have or abandon the ridge. Cole refuses to retreat. His men died taking this ground. He won't give it up without orders. Through the night of June 13th-14th, the ridge becomes hell on earth. German mortars pound American positions continuously. American wounded lie in foxholes, screaming for medics who can't reach them because German snipers shoot at anyone who moves. Dead bodies from both sides lie scattered across the ridge. The smell of death, cordite, and phosphorus smoke hangs over everything. Neither side controls the ridge completely. Americans hold the northern crest, Germans hold the south slope, and between them is a 50-meter no-man's land where nothing survives. Dawn on June 14th brings no relief. German artillery begins systematically shelling the ridge. 105mm and 150mm shells impact every few minutes, collapsing foxholes and killing men who survived the previous day's fighting. Cole's battalion is disintegrating. Companies that started with 120 men now have 40 or 50 effectives. Ammunition is running low. The wounded outnumber the able-bodied. Medical supplies are exhausted, and German attacks continue, probing attacks every few hours, testing American defenses, looking for weak points.
The strategic absurdity becomes apparent by midday on June 14th. Both sides are feeding men into a meat grinder over terrain that has minimal military value. The ridge doesn't control any roads, doesn't overlook any vital positions, doesn't block any German retreat routes. It's become important only because both sides are fighting for it. Military logic says abandon the ridge, let the Germans have it, find better ground elsewhere. But military pride and the knowledge that dozens of men already died here prevents either side from withdrawing. By afternoon on June 14th, Cole's battalion is combat ineffective. They've suffered approximately 160 casualties, dead, wounded, or missing, from an initial strength of about 450. That's a 35% casualty rate in 30 hours. Companies are commanded by lieutenants or even sergeants because captains are dead or wounded. Squads are down to 3 or 4 men. Some foxholes contain only corpses. The defenders killed by artillery, their positions overrun before reinforcement could arrive. Regiment finally authorizes withdrawal around 4 p.m. on June 14th. Cole receives orders to pull his battalion back to Carentan and reorganize. The 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment will take over the sector. Cole organizes the retreat carefully. He's not abandoning his dead if he can help it. Evacuation of wounded takes priority, then recovery of bodies, then withdrawal of remaining effectives. German fire continues throughout, killing additional men during the retreat. By nightfall on June 14th, the 502nd's 3rd Battalion is off the ridge. They've held it for approximately 27 hours at a cost of 174 casualties. The 506th moves on to the ridge to continue the defense. They'll hold it for another 3 days, suffering similar casualties before the tactical situation shifts and the ridge becomes irrelevant as American forces advance past it. The German casualties are difficult to determine precisely. German records from this period are incomplete. But captured German soldiers report their battalions suffered similarly heavy losses, possibly 200 to 250 casualties between June 13th and 15th. One German officer, captured on June 15th, tells interrogators, "We were ordered to retake that hill at any cost. We attacked 6 times. Each time the Americans threw us back. I lost 70 men from my company. For what? For a hill with nothing on it?" This question, for what, haunts everyone involved. After the war, military historians studying the Normandy campaign identified Dead Man's Ridge, as it's unofficially named by the soldiers who fought there, as a perfect example of attritional warfare gone wrong. Both sides committed forces to a position that lacked clear strategic value. Once committed, neither side could withdraw without appearing to admit defeat. So they kept fighting, kept dying, over ground that meant nothing in the larger context of the Normandy campaign. The human cost is measured not just in deaths, but in the destruction of effective military units. Cole's 3rd Battalion, which jumped into Normandy on D-Day with 550 men, is down to fewer than 300 effectives by June 15th. It takes 3 weeks of rest and replacement personnel before the battalion is combat ready again. The German 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment suffers similar degradation. It's pulled out of the line in late June and sent to rear areas for reconstitution. The tactical lessons are learned in blood. First, intelligence about enemy strength in bocage terrain is nearly impossible to obtain accurately. German positions are concealed by hedgerows and can't be detected by aerial reconnaissance. Second, artillery support is less effective in bocage than in open terrain because Germans can dig deep bunkers under hedgerows that protect them from shelling. Third, attacking across open ground against entrenched positions requires overwhelming firepower or extraordinary courage, and courage alone results in catastrophic casualties. Fourth, and perhaps most importantly, military objectives need clear strategic justification. Dead Man's Ridge became a killing ground partly because nobody at higher command levels understood why it mattered. The order to secure dominant terrain was vague enough that field commanders interpreted it to mean taking any high ground available. Better intelligence and clearer operational planning might have identified the ridge as not worth the cost of capturing. Cole's Medal of Honor citation, approved in 1944, describes his charge across open ground as extraordinary heroism and leadership. This is accurate. Cole's personal courage was unquestionable, but the citation doesn't mention that his heroism was necessary because of intelligence failures and poor tactical planning at higher levels. Cole led a desperate charge because he saw no alternative to save his pinned-down men. His courage saved some lives, but couldn't prevent the larger catastrophe of fighting for valueless terrain. The psychological impact on survivors is profound. Veterans of Dead Man's Ridge report recurring nightmares for years after the war. The intensity of close-quarters combat, killing men with bayonets, clearing foxholes with grenades, fighting hand-to-hand in darkness, creates trauma that doesn't heal easily. Many survivors refuse to discuss the battle, even with fellow veterans. It's too painful, too shameful somehow, to admit they fought and killed for a ridge that meant nothing. The German survivors express similar sentiments. Hans Müller, a Fallschirmjäger who fought on Dead Man's Ridge, writes in his memoir published in 1968, "We called it Hella Hügel, Hell Hill. We attacked it 5 times. Each time, the Americans killed us. My company started with 120 men. After 3 days, we had 38. When we finally withdrew, I looked back at that hill and thought, we died for nothing. That hill will be forgotten. Nobody will remember why we fought there." Müller was partially right. Dead Man's Ridge is largely forgotten in popular histories of World War II. It's overshadowed by more famous battles, D-Day itself, the Battle of the Bulge, Market Garden. But for the men who fought there, it represents something perhaps more important than famous battles. It represents the anonymous, forgotten combat that constituted most of the war's experience. For every dramatic, well-documented battle, there were dozens of small, savage fights over unnamed terrain that killed men just as dead. The physical ridge itself today is unremarkable farmland. There's no memorial, no plaque, nothing to indicate that over 400 men died there in 48 hours. French farmers cultivate the fields where paratroopers charged and died. Occasionally, farmers still unearth unexploded ordnance or human remains, grim reminders that the ground remembers even if human memory has faded. Some veterans made pilgrimages back to Normandy in later years, trying to find the exact location of Dead Man's Ridge. Most couldn't identify it with certainty. The bocage all looks similar: hedgerows, small fields, low ridges. Without GPS coordinates or detailed maps, the precise location becomes ambiguous. This geographic uncertainty mirrors the battle's historical obscurity. It happened, men died, but exactly where and exactly why becomes uncertain with time. The strategic outcome of fighting for Dead Man's Ridge is essentially nil. The Americans eventually advanced past it as part of the general breakout from the Normandy beachhead. The ridge didn't control that advance, it was simply one of hundreds of positions that had to be taken during the grinding attrition of bocage warfare. If Cole's battalion had bypassed the ridge entirely, the eventual outcome of the Normandy campaign would have been unchanged. The ridge mattered intensely to the men fighting for it in June 1944, but it didn't matter to the war's ultimate result. This creates a troubling philosophical question about military sacrifice. We honor soldiers who die in famous battles that changed history: Gettysburg, Stalingrad, Iwo Jima. But what about soldiers who die in obscure fights that changed nothing? Are their sacrifices less meaningful? Do they deserve less remembrance? Most veterans would say no. Every soldier who died fighting for his country deserves honor, regardless of whether his death affected strategic outcomes. But society's actual remembrance is selective, focusing on dramatic, famous battles while forgetting countless small actions like Dead Man's Ridge. Lieutenant Colonel Cole survived the battle, but was killed by a German sniper on September 18, 1944, during Operation Market Garden in Holland. He never learned he'd been awarded the Medal of Honor. The approval came after his death. His posthumous medal recognized his courage at Dead Man's Ridge, but by the time it was awarded, the ridge itself was already fading from memory, overshadowed by more recent battles. The 502nd Paratrooper Infantry Regiment maintains institutional memory of Dead Man's Ridge. Veterans associations occasionally discuss it at reunions. Unit histories mention it. But it's not celebrated the way some battles are celebrated, because there's nothing particularly glorious about charging across open ground into machine gun fire, or fighting hand-to-hand in darkness, or discovering the next morning that you killed for terrain your commanders can't explain why they wanted. The German 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment similarly remembers Dead Man's Ridge as a costly, frustrating battle. German veterans describe it as exemplifying the impossible situation they faced in Normandy, ordered to hold every position, forbidden to retreat, gradually destroyed through attrition while American material superiority grew overwhelming. Dead Man's Ridge was one of dozens of similar fights where German units were ground down defending positions that couldn't be held indefinitely. The broader pattern of bocage warfare in June and July 1944 vindicated the lessons of Dead Man's Ridge. The hedgerow fighting was incredibly costly for attackers. American casualties in Normandy during this period approached 50,000, far higher than D-Day itself. German casualties were similar. The bocage turned what was supposed to be a rapid breakout into a slow, grinding, attritional battle that resembled World War I more than the mobile warfare everyone expected in 1944.
Eventually, American forces developed specialized equipment and tactics for bocage fighting. Sherman tanks were fitted with Rhino hedgerow cutters, welded steel teeth that allowed tanks to smash through hedgerows instead of climbing over them. Infantry learned to use combined arms tactics, coordinating closely with tanks and artillery to reduce casualties. Air support became more effective as forward air controllers improved communication with fighter-bombers. By late July, the Americans achieved operational breakthrough with Operation Cobra, finally escaping the bocage and beginning the rapid advance across France. But in mid-June 1944, those innovations hadn't been developed yet. Dead Man's Ridge was fought with tactics that were inadequate for bocage terrain, frontal assaults across open ground against entrenched positions. The result was predictable: heavy casualties, minimal gains, exhausted units. Cole and his paratroopers did everything right at the tactical level. They showed courage, maintained unit cohesion, closed with the enemy despite terrible odds. But courage can't overcome fundamentally flawed operational planning. The 48 hours of Dead Man's Ridge exemplify the brutal reality that most of World War II combat wasn't glorious or strategically significant. It was grinding, terrifying, deadly work over terrain that often lacked clear importance. Men fought and died because they were ordered to, because their buddies were fighting and dying beside them, because retreating felt like betrayal of those already lost. Strategy and tactics sometimes mattered less than simple, stubborn refusal to abandon ground already paid for in blood. The soldiers who fought at Dead Man's Ridge, American and German, shared more with each other than with their respective civilian populations back home. They understood fear, exhaustion, the smell of death, the sound of incoming artillery, the terror of close combat. They understood fighting for terrain whose importance nobody could explain. They understood that war isn't primarily about grand strategy or historical significance. It's about surviving the next hour, protecting your friends, completing the mission you've been given, and somehow maintaining sanity when everything around you is insane. Dead Man's Ridge didn't change the war. It didn't affect strategic outcomes. It won't be in history textbooks. But for the men who fought there during those 48 hours in June 1944, it was the entire war compressed into a small piece of Norman farmland where they gave everything they had and lost friends they'd never replace. That's the reality of war that no strategic analysis can capture: the individual, personal, irreplaceable cost measured in lives that mattered infinitely to the people who lived them, regardless of whether they mattered to history. But here's the secret nobody tells you about Dead Man's Ridge. American intelligence discovered after the battle that the ridge sat directly above a major German ammunition depot buried in underground bunkers built by French farmers before the war. The Germans were defending so fiercely not because of the ridge's tactical value, but because losing it would expose their ammunition storage to Allied artillery observation.
If the Americans had known about the depot, they could have called in heavy bombardment and destroyed weeks' worth of German ammunition supplies. Instead, they fought for the surface terrain while the real prize remained hidden underground. The depot was only discovered when retreating Germans partially destroyed it in July, and by then it was too late to exploit the intelligence. And there's something even stranger. A French resistance observer watched the entire battle from a nearby church steeple and sent detailed reports to London via clandestine radio. His reports included German troop strengths, reinforcement movements, and artillery positions, information that could have helped American forces if it had reached them in time. But the intelligence took 48 hours to be decoded, analyzed, and transmitted back to Normandy tactical units. By the time it arrived, the battle was over. The observer, a farmer named Michel Leclerc, survived the war and kept his observation notes, which weren't discovered until his grandson donated them to a French museum in 1998.
And there's an even more shocking twist. Among the German dead found on Dead Man's Ridge were 3 soldiers who shouldn't have been there. They were actually French collaborators serving in German uniform as part of an obscure unit called the Légion des Volontaires Français. Their presence suggested that some Frenchmen were actively fighting against Allied liberation, a fact that was deeply embarrassing to post-war French authorities and was suppressed in official histories for decades. The identities of these collaborators were sealed in classified files until 2004, when researchers finally confirmed that Frenchmen fought on both sides at Dead Man's Ridge. Want to know what was in that underground ammunition depot and why the Germans never destroyed it completely? Curious about Michel Leclerc's observation reports and what other intelligence arrived too late to save lives? Subscribe to Cypher Tales because our next video reveals the hidden intelligence failures of the Normandy campaign, the critical information that reached commanders hours or days too late, and how thousands of lives were lost because of communication delays that seem absurd by modern standards. The reason why some World War II battles were fought without commanders knowing what their own intelligence services had already discovered will shock you. If this story moved you, smash that like button. It helps us honor the forgotten battles and soldiers who deserve remembrance. Drop a comment below. Would you have charged across open ground following Cole? Could you have maintained your courage fighting for terrain whose importance nobody could explain? What separates a meaningless death from a meaningful sacrifice? What other forgotten battles of World War II should we cover? Share this video with anyone interested in the brutal reality of combat. They need to understand that war isn't always strategic brilliance and historic victories, but sometimes just men dying on nameless ground for reasons nobody can quite articulate. Until next time, remember, history celebrates famous battles and strategic victories, but the true cost of war is paid in thousands of small, forgotten fights where ordinary men gave everything they had for terrain that wouldn't even appear on the maps they carried. This is Cypher Tales, where forgotten battles find their voice, where nameless ground claims its place in memory, and where the sacrifices of ordinary soldiers receive the honor that history too often reserves only for famous names and celebrated victories.